Yo, what's up? Let's get it going, y'all. Let's start going. Let's get it going here for another afternoon edition of your daily dose of some based analysis, some based analyzation of some literature. Let's do this, you guys. What's up? Shout out to all the homies in the chat there. Shout out to Ellie, Crispy, Jeff, everybody. I know that JD is going at the same time right now. Shout out to Jay's analysis. He's going to be going for a while. So I thought we'd just barrel through. We gotta keep it rolling here, folks. We're trying to get a nice routine where we got something to. I don't know if you're looking forward to it. Hopefully you are, but I look forward to it every day. But we get a routine going every day, and trying not to do any postpone at all. And we're trying to keep it going. Did I freeze here? Hopefully I didn't freeze. Nope. Still be going. Should still be going. All right. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So today, what we're doing is we're gonna look into some Anglo-Saxon literature. Right. We mentioned this in the last couple of streams. So we've done Shakespeare, Milton, Wilfred Owen, Ezra Pound, Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath. We've done Julius Caesar. We've done Macbeth. We've done a whole bunch of stuff. We've kind of gone all over the place. We did a whole section of Romantic era literature. We did Lord Byron, Shelley. We looked at Blake. So I thought today we'd go back in time a little bit and start looking at some Anglo-Saxon literature. So let's get it popping here. Shout out to Kristen. Shout out to Eliana. Everybody. Thank you to everybody who has supported me, supported the channel so far. You see, there's a link in the description up there for Cash App. So I really appreciate it. Anything that you guys out there watching this now or later, if you want to support the channel, support me. I really appreciate it, of course. And I thank you for your generosity. You guys have been incredibly sweet and incredibly gracious. So I really appreciate it. I won't keep saying this, but we're trying to get the channel up, right? We're trying to get the subs, trying to share the streams across everything. Have something for people to listen to and look forward to, especially, if they're on their afternoon drive time, right? Or they're at work or they're just chilling. So shout out to ADH. Everybody, if you're watching this later, especially, please go to A Devotional Heart at YouTube and like and share. Shout out to my main homie there, Okayski. Shout out to Jetski, my main homie. Shout out to all of my main homies out there. I love you. And let's get it going here. So yeah, if you want to support me, support the stream, the channel, so we can get it going, that would be great. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep barreling through. I'm trying to, set a time every day so that you can have something to rely on, look forward to every day. So today we're going to be doing Anglo-Saxon literature, aka Olde English. And so let me start off by just giving you some books here, some book recommendations. I don't know if they're recommendations. If you want to take them as recommendations, that's okay. But I'll just show you some of my sort of sources here, just in the library here and in the other room. So let's start off with a bunch of these I've had since grad school and university. This is just an anthology of Anglo-Saxon literature. Just just an Oxford anthology, and I don't know. It's got some good material in it. I read this back in this was like 2000, I think 2002. Okay. Let's see. The main one, the best thing I can recommend out of all of this, of course, would be Seamus Heaney's Beowulf. I read this in what's today? Because I read this March 12th, 2000. And I remember reading this. It had just come out. Won the Whitbread that year. I got it brand new. And I was at my first year of college in Memphis. Shout out to Memphis 10. And I was at Rhodes College in Memphis. And that's when I said it was my final decision to move to Belfast and switch over to Queen's University there. Shout out to Crispy out there. But this is by far the best of Beowulf, the best translation, and it's made original. It's really, really great. Shout out to David there. And yeah, so this is a great book. If you could read any book on the Anglo-Saxon world, on the Anglo-Saxon era, um, any Old English literature, this is your best translation right here. Seamus Heaney's Beowulf. So we'll get back to Seamus Heaney in a little bit. This is Anglo-Saxon. This is the life of the writings of King Alfred the Great here. That's a great book. This is the classic Gwyn Jones History of the Vikings here. This is an older edition. But this is it's got everything in it. I remember the last time I went back to this was when Vikings came out with Ragnar and Ragnar saga, and I hadn't read it since university. And I went back to this and sort of refreshed myself on the story of Ragnar, which that's a great show. I don't know what you guys think, but I love that show. That especially the first few seasons are amazing. I love Vikings, and I love what's the one on Shitflix. What's the show? The Last Kingdom. I love The Last Kingdom. Yo, those are great shows. They're great dude shows, right? Dudes just dominating the Anglo-Saxon world. So yeah, those are great shows. This is Anglo-Saxon. This is Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People. That's the Venerable Bede, right? I actually went to when I was still in university. I walked across England. I walked across I walked through the Lake District. This was in January of 2000. What a time to be alive! What an innocent time. And I had Christmas off for the holiday, obviously, and then I had January was revision and exams, and I didn't have to take any exams. I'd already gotten through all. I didn't have to take any exams because of my marks and everything. So I'm not bragging, folks. But anyway, and so what I did was I came back home, and then I went back in early January, and I just packed up my bag and walked. I took a ferry over to Troon in Scotland from Northern Ireland. Then I went to Carlisle in England, and I went on a sort of Arthurian quest adventure. I went to a bunch of the Arthurian sites. I was alone. I was 19 years old, and it was amazing. I spent 2 weeks. The first week, was it only 2 weeks? I feel like it might have been a month, but I walked down. I was in Western England. I never made it to Bristol or Bath, but I lived later in Bristol. I lived there for 2 years, and then I went up to the Lake District. I walked all through the Lake District, crossed a mountain. I just had a little backpack, and like I had like a credit card and some cash, and I lived on like basic food the whole time, and I didn't take a camera with me, so I could sort of all my memories are in here, and I thought it would denigrate. I've talked about this with ADH. I thought it would denigrate the trip if I took pictures, because it would sort of no one wants to see your pictures of your trip, especially back then in a photo album, right? This is pre-digital photography, and so I thought, it'll just make it'll make the memories not as special as they were. So I didn't take a camera or anything. I lived there for 5 years. Okay. I lived in the UK for 5 years. I lived in Malaysia for a summer when I was acting. I lived in New York for a year. I lived in Memphis for a year. Anyway, so I went through the Lake District, Windermere, Ambleside, and I walked everywhere. I took some trains from one place to another, but then I went to I kind of went through Manchester and a bunch of places. I avoided London, but I went to Nottingham and Colchester. Before that, I went up to Northern England, and I walked across Northern England. I walked across, not from west to east, but I walked across Yorkshire, walked across the Vale of Yorkshire. It was January. It was snowing, beautiful. Then I walked down the East Coast, and I went from Whitby to Robin Hood's Bay, which is made along an old footpath on a railroad track. And then from there, I went down I took a train to London where I just caught the Channel Tunnel there. And then I took that over to France. And then in France, I spent I went straight to Charleville, which is where Rimbaud is from. And then I went from there to Lyon and then Paris. And I met up with my best friend from Belfast in Paris. And we spent some time in Paris. And Eliana lived in Hull. It's amazing. And then we flew back to Belfast. And amazingly, back then flights, I don't know what they are now, but what was the EasyJet had just come out and then later Flybe, but the flight was like £1, which is like I don't know, like $1.50 or something. So you could get flights anywhere. That's later on. The next year I did that on the continent. And went through a bunch of countries. I've talked about that a little bit before. One weekend, I had a week off later, and I flew to Portugal for about the equivalent of about $2 American. So it was great. Yeah, the good old days. So, but anyway, I mentioned all that we went on that little train. We went on that little tangent because of Bede, and the Abbey at Whitby. And Whitby is, people have their little favorite little cities and places, and out of the way places. And all my adventures were certainly, everybody likes to think that they're off the beaten path, but mine was literally off the beaten path. I was staying in youth hostels the whole time, and I was by myself, and I would go on foot. I would walk like 30 miles a day. But Whitby was one of my favorites because it's a small little, fishing town and in northern England, and it's got the Abbey. It's the home of it's where Dracula landed, right? In Bram Stoker. It's where Dracula lands, and it's where Captain Cook is from. And Captain Cook is my favorite explorer. He was my Captain Cook was a pretty based explorer. So anyway, so that's Bede. And then let's see. Then I wanted to show you just a couple of these other books because they tie into the Anglo-Saxon, I don't know, ethos, but they sort of tie into the Anglo-Saxon world. Somebody mentioned them. Oh, it was Jay recently mentioned them. He asked about in one of the streams about the oldest, what was the oldest, parliament. And as far as I know, I've always thought, I might be wrong, but I always thought it was Iceland. Iceland had the Althing in the year 1000 AD when they Christianized. But I've always been interested in the Vikings in Iceland. And don't worry, we're not going to do like a cringe like neo Viking stream or something here. We're just talking about the source material like we always do, going through literature and seeing if we can gain sort of an idea of what the world was like then and how those themes carry across time, if they are still the same, and what's the meaning, right? And what is the speaker's purpose? And we're especially going to say speaker's purpose when we go over these bits because we don't know who the authors are. And I think that's cool. I'll get to that in a little bit. But anyway, Iceland and the Vikings. When I was at university, in Belfast, I took a great class on the Icelandic saga. And so I just wanted to show you some of the Icelandic sagas. Those shows, Vikings is taken directly from the Icelandic sagas, but the Last Kingdom isn't. It's a fictionalized account, but the sources would be, right. And the Vikings, we all know, like a lot of the stuff about the Vikings in Iceland, right? That they called it Iceland to get people to go to Greenland instead of Iceland. But aside from all that stuff, the Icelandic saga is really cool because first of all, it's prose, right? We're not reading verse. We're reading prose like we're reading a novel. So you could call these the first novels. Now, later, the first novel, many, would say that it's Cervantes, right? With Don Quixote. Have you guys ever read Don Quixote? I read it when I was back in school back in my prepping days. We read it and we had to translate it for Senor Nystrom, my teacher, Senor Nystrom, who actually he went to Harvard with old Uncle Ted K, which is pretty cool. And he was anyway. I'll tell stories about him later. I can't get on too many tangents, but Cervantes was a exact contemporary of Shakespeare, and that's really considered the first novel. The first English novels are Henry Jones, and then later Daniel Defoe. But the first novels really would be the Icelandic saga. Saga meaning say. It comes from the root word for say, right? It's like it's oral, but it is here, and this is a good one. This is Laxdale Saga. This is a great saga. Another one is this one's pretty interesting. This is the Vinland sagas, right? And that is about the discovery of the North American continent, right? It's pretty. This is a thin one. This one is my absolute favorite. If you had to read one, I read this twice. I read it in March 1st, 2001. I read it again later, October 3rd, 2001. I read it twice in 1 year. I've read it a couple times since then. I recommended it to my dad. He loved it. And this is Eagle Saga. This one is great because this ties in with the theme of the whole channel. This guy is a warrior poet. He's a warrior poet in the classic sense. He's described as kind of a troll character in the book. He's kind of a big, like, ugly guy. But he is a poet, he's kind of a seer, and he's a warrior. And this one's really good, really entertaining. Probably one of those considered the best, which was not my favorite, but it is pretty good, is Njál's Saga. Then we have 7 Viking romances. We have the Eyrbyggja Saga. And did I do Laxdale Saga? Laxdale Saga is, if I remember, is about that was the first one we did. That was about a horse, and has Freyfaxi. And Freyfaxi, fax, horse in Viking and Icelandic. And that's where we get Shadowfax from, who is the horse in Tolkien, right? Fax meaning is an Old English word for horse. Now, interestingly enough, we're gonna talk about Beowulf here in a second, but first we're gonna do these 2 Anglo-Saxon poems. We should talk a little bit, I guess, about the history of Anglo-Saxon literature, and not so much the history of the Anglo-Saxon world. We're not going to really talk about the history of Vikings. That's a whole other. That's somebody else's stream. But we will talk about the literature, and we can talk about Beowulf for a second. So Beowulf composed around, 800, 900 AD. There's one copy of it. It's considered the epic poem of England. It is a true epic. It is verse, but it is written in Old English. Now, we've discussed before many times, really, that there are 3 eras of. Pull my sweater down here. There are 3 eras of English, of the English language, 3 sort of phases. The first is Old English or Anglo-Saxon. You can use those terms interchangeably. Then we have Middle English with Chaucer, and then we've got Modern English starting really with Shakespeare and the King James Bible. There aren't many examples in literature of Old English that you'll see in a literature book or an anthology. In terms of a bigger, I just showed you a million examples, really, but in terms of an all-encompassing, if you had a textbook or at school or whatever, usually they'll include 2 of the poems we're about to do and Beowulf. And Beowulf is, like I said, it is a true epic. It's an epic hero. We could talk about what are the qualifications for an epic hero. An epic hero is somebody who, we can talk about Joseph Campbell and the Hero with 1,000 Faces or the Hero's Journey. He mentions all this, and the epic hero really is someone who, first of all, he's larger than life, right? He, we'll see with Beowulf that he has what we would consider now, if we were watching some sort of Coomer version, he would have superpowers. They're not described as such in the poem, but they are really supernatural abilities. Beowulf's are that he can swim for incredibly long distances, which reminds me of Julius Caesar, because there's a part in it that Julius Caesar almost mirrors perfectly the Shakespearean play, and that really did happen to Caesar. And so he can swim better than anyone, which also reflects the Viking world and the sea-born world, right? The emphasis on the sea. And he can hold his breath underwater for like days at a time. his other power is his grip. He has the strongest grip in the world. And also Gattaca, great point, Nate. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That's excellent. Yes, the same thing happens in Gattaca. Yeah, the swimming competition where they're competing against one another, and one who is the sort of alpha, the dominant one, fails, and the other saves him. So great point, Natesky. Thank you for that. Yeah, so, and that happens in Beowulf. So we have the larger than life figure. We have the superpowers that he has. We also have the fact that he is going to go through a series of trials in his quest, and he's going to encounter greater and greater villains, adversaries, antagonists throughout. We'll see with Beowulf that he goes through a series of 3, and we've seen that 3 is the number that we get this number 3 because of the Trinity, right? And because we get there are 3 stages in all of these heroic quests, because the hero, one of the biggest thing with the hero is that he is described in a lot of these poems, in the national poems, in the epic poems, especially in Beowulf, as a Christ-like hero, right? He has to embody all of the virtue and the strength, and the will and the national characteristics of the people that he represents. A couple of other examples of epic poems. We've mentioned this in one of the other streams. I think it was Paradise Lost, because Paradise Lost could be considered the epic poem of England. The epic of France would be the Song of Roland. The epic of Spain would be El Cid. Rome had the Aeneid. Greece had the Iliad and the Odyssey. What's America's epic poem? That's one of the questions. One could say that the epic poem is not a poem at all. It's the great American novel, and that would be Moby Dick. However, we'll have to go into Moby Dick later, because that's really the opposite. That's really that's really a Luciferian Gnostic journey of transcendence. And one could also say that really, if it were a poem, it would be Walt Whitman's Song of Myself would be the epic of America. But Beowulf is interesting because it's the epic poem of England, but it doesn't take place in England, and it's not about an Englishman. It's about Beowulf is he's basically Swedish, right? And we'll get back to that later, because I want to get to these 2 other poems before I get too deep into that. I know seems like I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. But let's get into 2 of my favorite poems. And these are not epic poems. They are narrative, but they are, yes, thank you, Dave. But they are poems. They're not epic. They're narrative, but they are short. And we have them in fragments. I'm just taking them from an old book here. And the first is called The Seafarer. And this is a pure Viking Anglo-Saxon poem. But like we've said before, it's Anglo-Saxon because Old English is English, but it's pure Germanic because of the nature of the Germanic people and their fanning out across Europe, really starting in, I guess, modern day, Central Europe, Switzerland. We have them fanning out all across Europe, and we get the Gauls, the Franks, the Angles, the Saxons, the Danes, the Rus, right? So let's go into The Seafarer. Hold on, let me find it. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, it's translated by Burton Raffle. All these works are early on were translated by Burton Raffle, later surpassed by Seamus Heaney, clearly in my view. And as I was saying with Tolkien earlier, by the way, just to tie up that little thread, Tolkien's important for this because you may know, if you know anything about Tolkien, that he was I don't know a whole lot about Tolkien. I just know it in relation to the other literature, and that basically Tolkien was the preeminent Beowulf scholar of the time in the early 20th century. And he promoted Beowulf heavily. In fact, like a lot of great literature in the canon, it'll go through phases where it's not, there's people kind of, they don't forget about it, but it becomes sort of out of fashion. I mean, Shakespeare was sort of out of fashion in the 1700s, made a big comeback. Same with Beowulf. People didn't really read it. And then Tolkien had learned so much from Beowulf and used obviously so much of it in his own writing that it sort of took hold in academia, and we still continue to read it to this day. So let's read The Seafarer. And this is by what we call the Seafarer poet, because he doesn't have a name. I think that's cool. That's so cool that we don't know the author of these poems and we call them by their title. I think that's almost Arthurian, right? We have the Seafarer poet, the Beowulf poet. So here we go. This tale is true and mine. It tells how the sea took me and swept me back and forth in sorrow and fear and pain. Showed me suffering in 100 ships, in 1,000 ports, and in me. It tells of smashing surf when I sweated in the cold of an anxious watch. Perched in the bow as it dashed under cliffs. My feet were cast in icy bands, bound with frost, with frozen chains, and hardship groaned around my heart. Hunger tore at my sea-weary soul. No man sheltered on the quiet fairness of earth can feel how wretched I was, drifting through winter on an ice-cold sea. Whirled in sorrow, alone in a world blown clear of love, hung with icicles. The hailstorms flew. The only sound was the roaring sea, the freezing waves. The song of the swan might serve for pleasure, the cry of the seafowl, the death noise of birds instead of laughter, the mewing of gulls instead of mead. Storms beat on the rocky cliffs and were echoed by icy feathered terns and the eagle's screams. No kinsman could offer comfort there to a soul left drowning in desolation. Now, how awesome is the language already in this poem, right? The language is strong, hard, tactile, cold, icy, right? All of the words are carefully chosen and echo the climate, the surroundings, the struggle, the strife. And we can already see that here is thank you for dropping that link, Jeff, my homeboy. Yes, please support me via Cash App or PayPal. I really appreciate it. So we already see that we're on the hero's journey here. And we remember that when we look at literature, we always look at literature in two ways. We've said this many times before, but if you're new here or if you are watching this later, consider that the great literature is to be read and understood in two ways. There is the literal meaning and there's the figurative meaning. You'll all remember this, I'm sure, from school. But the literal meaning, and I'm not trying to teach anyone here. I'm not trying to, this isn't educational in terms of me, being didactic. I'm just trying to go over the source material, discuss worldviews, etc., and discuss, how we get to the meaning in this. The literal meaning would be the superficial, the lines on the page, right? It would be like the metaphor of the iceberg that we see all the time, which is especially relevant in literature because the iceberg is the little bit sticking above the water, right? And that's what we read on the page. But the true meaning is the figurative meaning, right? It's what we read into it. It's between the lines. Yes, it is. In this, it would be submarine. It's the big thing, right, that we read, that we're trying to pull out of this. Just a sidebar here. We discussed Titanic in the last one. Have you ever noticed, you guys, that this bothers me about Titanic? We discussed Titanic, and Jack is the trickster Lucifer figure. But another thing about Titanic dealing with this is, have you ever noticed how in Titanic, right, they're going along and the guy says, iceberg right ahead. Now you think he says iceberg dead ahead. At least that's what it is in the common, we commonly think of that. And that is the expression dead ahead. Now he literally says right ahead because the iceberg is ahead and on the right. But wouldn't it it would make more sense in terms of if it really happened this way, right? To say dead ahead, because we have the foreshadowing of the fact that they're going to die. Yes. Anyway, that has always bothered me about the film. But so where was I? Yeah, that we have the hero's journey here. We have a quest, and we have the guy who is going along. This is his life, and he is in the midst. We kind of start in media res, even though he says this tale is true in mine, and he gives us a little bit of exposition. So I suppose it's not really in media res, but he immediately, we dive into this guy suffering, and he says, a soul left drowning in desolation, right? He is he's in a dark night of the soul. He is at a point of agony. But we'll see what that means to him because this isn't a tale of a guy wallowing. This is where hardness and faith will lead him to find the end of his journey, and he actually delights in the hardness. He says, and who could believe, knowing but the passion of cities, swelled proud with wine and no taste of misfortune, how often, how wearily I put myself back on the paths of the sea. Night would blacken, it would snow from the north, frost bound the earth, and hail would fall, the coldest seas, and how my heart would begin to beat, knowing once more the salt waves tossing in the towering sea. The time for journeys would come, and my soul called me eagerly out, sent me over the horizon, seeking foreigners' homes. Now, we know what he's going to do in those foreigners' homes, right? Right? He's going to go there and he's going to burn and loot and pillage because he a Viking, right? But the fact that his blood is quickened by the thought of going back out, putting himself back out into danger, and this is obviously a metaphor. This is why we still read this now, because it applies now. Right? Who could believe, knowing but the passion of cities, swelled proud with wine and no taste of misfortune? How people live so easily in the city in terms of you go to the grocery store, you get your food, you engage in all kinds of weird and crazy behavior in the city, and everything's there in your little pod, right? You're eating your bugs and you're doing whatever you do, and yet somebody had to bring you that stuff. It had to get there somehow. Now, obviously, now Gil Bates just makes it in a lab. But in terms of us, right, I go to the grocery store and I buy my whatever I get. I buy my meat. Let's just say that. I buy my Jimmy Dean breakfast bowl, my Paula Deen knuckle butter and knuckle cheese. And somebody had to bring it there, right? And this dude had to go out and do it. He had to go out and live. He says, but there isn't a man on earth so proud, so born to greatness, so bold with his youth, grown so brave or so graced by God that he feels no fear as the sails unfurl, wondering what fate has willed and will do. Now, okay, now let's halt for a second, because this brings up one of the major themes in the play, right? We get the contrast between, we get this dialectic. Yes, we get free will and we get fate. So the obvious interpretation in terms of, the average student or certainly the average normie is, well, yeah, sure. He's doing what he does. But also they believe in fate. Well, come on now, right? He's either doing what he's doing with no agency in his life. He has no personal decisions and he has no will, and he's just a slave of fate, or he is making the decisions and he's taking action, right? So the question is, why are these terms used side by side in the poem? And some would speculate, many scholars would speculate, that the poem itself, what happened was a pagan Viking, Odin worshiper, wrote the original poem, and then later it was revised by a monk, because, as we all know, after the fall of Rome and during in the Middle Ages, all of these classic works survived thanks to the monks. The monks pulled them out of the fire, literally pulled them out of the fire, saved them, illuminated the texts, right? Illuminate, confirm. No, they illuminated the texts. They copy the text by hand, and they come down to us. So one would say maybe a monk found this and said, okay, this is a great story, but I don't, all this fate stuff. So we're going to revise it and sort of make it as seamless as possible. I would say that that's not the case. I would say this is a singular poet, a warrior, an actual warrior poet who found himself in the middle of a great flux in time. And remember, if the Icelanders Christianized in 1000, that means there were people that were born pagan, Viking, and that became Christian with everyone else in their lifetime. So it makes sense that we would have this sort of a dichotomy, or not a confusion, but we would have two separate ideas trying to reconcile themselves for the truth until eventually we'll see at the end we are purely Christianized. But there isn't a man on earth so proud, so born in his greatness, right? So graced by God, no fear, right? He said, wondering what fate has willed and will do. Notice he uses the word will there, right? Fate and will. He says, no passion for women, no worldly pleasures, nothing. Only the oceans heave, but longing wraps itself around him. Orchards blossom, the towns bloom, fields grow lovely as the world springs fresh, and all these admonish that willing mind, leaping to journeys, always set in thoughts traveling on a quickening tide. So summer sentinel, the cuckoo sings in his murmuring voice, and our hearts mourn as he urges. Who could understand in ignorant ease what we others suffer as the paths of exile stretch endlessly on? Now that is true regardless of you being on a literal exile right out in the ocean. This is true for a figurative exile. Many have probably felt this sense of exile with recent events, in the last 2 years. I mean, who among us hasn't felt the exile of the IRL people that we know going in directions that we never thought they would, going straight into that stabby, yes, and then isolating you, or you no longer, you realize you've gone through this looking glass. We all already went through that, but I'm saying in terms of in real life, we've gone on two divergent paths, right? And you feel the solitude of exile. And yet my heart wanders away, my soul roams with the sea, the whale's home, wandering to the world, returning ravenous with desire, flying solitary, screaming, exciting me to the open ocean, breaking oaths on the curve of a wave. How Viking is that? But what happens here is, okay, so let me go back a little bit here. So when we read these poems, the Anglo-Saxon poems, they are written, when you look at them on the page in the original verse, they're written with what's called a caesura in the center of the page. And that means that if you're looking at the page, right, you're looking at a page, instead of it being one column of verse, we actually, in a way, have two columns of verse. We have a line, then we have a literal break in the middle of the line, and then more of the line. So the lines are all divided into two, and this is called a caesura, C-A-E-S-U-R-A. And the caesura signifies, really, you can think of it like a caesura like Caesar, because Caesar's life is cut off in the middle, so to speak. So we get this break in the middle of the line. Now, that is the standard form for the Anglo-Saxon poets. And it doesn't appear that way usually in English translations because it doesn't really translate well. But what they do to compensate is many of the lines will have either a comma, or they'll have a beat in the middle of the line, or they will have some sort of space in terms of the content. And we'll see a lot of alliteration within the line, because even though this is a poem, it doesn't rhyme, obviously, because it's an epic poem. Epic poems, narrative poems do not rhyme. But in terms of this poem, we see that there's no rhyme, but we get the alliteration, which sort of unites the two lines. So, for instance, this line 45 in the poem, it says, no passion for women, comma, no worldly pleasures. So the W and the W sound, the W sound in women and the W sound in worldly, they sort of suffice for a rhyme in terms of they unite the line. So we get two parts of a line broken up in the middle, but they are united in one. So what we have here, what we just read was breaking O's on the curve of a wave. And he talks about breaking an oath, which seems a little, this is right. We're talking pure, paganism here, breaking oaths. But then the line breaks for one of the first times in the middle to a new line. And he says, thus the joys of God are fervent with life. So he broke an oath, but now he goes back to God, where life itself fades quickly into the earth. You drinking real loud, baby. You're drinking real loud, doggy. Can y'all hear her? He says, the wealth of the world neither reaches to heaven nor remains. No man has ever faced the dawn certain which of fate's three threats would fall. So we get fate and we get the idea of three again. Fate's three threats: illness or age or an enemy's sword, snatching the life from his soul. Nobody's sure of that and what it will be for you. The praise the living pour on the dead, flowers from reputation. Plant an earthly life of profit, reaped even from hatred and rancor of bravery, flung in the devil's face. And death can only bring you earthly praise and a song to celebrate a place with the angels. Life eternally blessed in the hosts of heaven, he says. Now he goes into what we call the ubi sunt motif. We're getting pretty deep here into the literary terminology. I realize that, but this is such a rich poem. What that means is essentially, where are those who have gone before? And it's this idea which recurs throughout Anglo-Saxon literature and really comes down to today of where are those who have gone before? Once we had bounty, once we had everyone was here, and now everyone's gone and everything's gone. But it's also in a sense of, you consider that everybody born died, right? You look at ruins, and you wonder, this is where all that Tartaria stuff comes from, right? Which is, you look at these ruins or you look at these gigantic buildings, these structures, and you think, oh, the Anunnaki must have made these or whatever. The giants, when the giants roamed the earth. There's a great short story about that. I can't remember the name, but it's essentially what happens in Logan's Run, which is like, it's in the post-apocalyptic, dystopia, and the guy's wandering around the city or around these ruins in this wasteland, and he comes upon etchings in stone, and the etchings in stone are like, they're these giant letters, and he sees Washington, right? And he says, who was this man, Washington? Well, it's because the Wa has been rubbed out. And he says, oh, these people must have been giants because of the statues. Well, we get this idea that people were bigger and better before. So where have they all gone is the question. So he says, the days are gone when the kingdoms of earth flourished in glory. Now there are no rulers, no emperors, no givers of gold, as once there were when wonderful things were worked among them and they lived in lordly magnificence. Those powers have vanished. Those pleasures are dead. The weakest survives and the world continues, kept spinning by toil. All the glory is tarnished. The world's honor ages and shrinks, bent like the men who mold it. Their faces blanch as time advances. Their beards wither and they mourn the memory of friends, the sons of princes sown in the dust. The soul, stripped of its flesh, knows nothing of sweetness or sour, feels no pain, bends neither its hand nor its brain. A brother opens his palms and pours down gold on his kinsman's grave, strewing his coffin with treasures intended for heaven. But nothing golden shakes the wrath of God for a soul overflowing with sin, and nothing hidden on earth rises to heaven. So this is the last stanza of the poem. And he says, we all fear God. He turns the earth. He set it swinging firmly in space, gave life to the world and light to the sky. Death leaps at the fools who forget their God. That's one of the only lines, by the way, in the poem that is a solid line without a caesura. That I can, I mean, there is the F sound that unites the line, but he says, death leaps at the fools who forget their God. He says, he who lives humbly has angels from heaven to carry him courage and strength and belief. A man must conquer pride, not kill it. Be firm with his fellows, chaste for himself. Treat all the world as the world deserves, with love or with hate, but never with harm. It's funny that he says, don't ever treat the world with harm, right? He talked about at the beginning. This dude talks about like, yeah, I know I'm going to go. What did he say? He said, the time for journeys would come and my soul called me eagerly out, sent me over the horizon, seeking foreigners' homes. But he says, though an enemy seek to scorch him in hell or set the flames of a funeral pyre under his Lord, fate is stronger and God mightier than any man's mind. Okay, fate is stronger and God mightier. Well, you're equating fate and God, right? However, let's see how the poem ends, and let's see if he finds some sort of salvation in the poem. Our thoughts should turn to where our home is. Consider the ways of coming there. Then strive for sure permission for us to rise to that eternal joy, that life born in the love of God and the hope of heaven. Praise the holy grace of him who honored us, eternal, unchanging creator of earth. Amen. Well, he ends with a prayer, right? In the end, yes, he puts his faith in God and he prays. So let's read The Wanderer, okay? Because this is sort of tied hand in hand. Different poet, The Wanderer poet. This one is a little bit shorter than the Seafarer, and then I guess we can talk about Beowulf. What do you guys want to do? Does that sound good? The Wanderer. Shout out to everybody watching me live in the chat. Especially, I really appreciate you guys, especially because JD's rolling right now. He's rocking. And usually we're all over in the JD his house. So I appreciate you coming and giving me your time. I definitely appreciate it. I like that we're having fun here. All right, The Wanderer. This lonely traveler longs for grace, for the mercy of God. Grief hangs on his heart and follows the frost-cold foam he cuts in the sea, sailing endlessly, aimlessly in exile. Fate has opened a single port, memory. He sees his kinsmen slaughtered again and cries. All right, so again, we have these ideas of fate, and we see the typical, Jay Dwyer, I think, is that guy. But we see again the caesura and the typical form, and we see this sort of meditation on what is fate, right, and exile. But we get something interesting here, and that is the idea of memory. Now, we had the idea of memory and looking back in the last poem, especially with the Ubi Sunt motif and mutability. But here we're going to kind of go in a different direction. He says, and do you mind if I read this in my RP? I'm trying to read this in my RP actor's voice, although I don't have much practice lately. I've drunk too many lonely dawns, grey with morning. Once there were men to whom my heart could hurry, hot with open longing. They're long since dead. My heart is closed on itself, quietly learning that silence is noble and sorrow nothing that speech can cure. Sadness has never driven sadness off. Fate blows hardest on a bleeding heart. Ain't that the truth? Shit, right? On a bleeding heart. Cue the boomer jokes. No, but right. But when he talked, by the way, when he talked about in that first part, the men to whom his heart could hurry, he's obviously talking about his lords, right? His thanes whom he served, because in the hierarchy of even pre-feudal Europe, right, we get everyone having a, everyone serves and is served in a way. But we talked about this before, I think at the beginning of the whole channel, about the idea of service, right? Of fulfillment through service. And now he's like a Japanese Ronin. Yes, he has no one to serve because they're all gone. He'll serve God, but he doesn't have any of his human beings around to whom he can serve. Yes, thank you, Kristen. Appreciate you. He says, let's see. He said, so those who thirst for glory smother secret weakness and longing. Fate blows hardest on a bleeding heart. So those who thirst for glory smother secret weakness and longing. Neither weep nor sigh nor listen to the sickness in their souls. So I, lost and homeless, forced to flee the darkness that fell on the earth and my Lord. Yeah, right? This dude is this guy is a Chad. This guy is an alpha giga Chad level infinity. Yes, so far. He says the bleeding heart, the complainer, is a sickness and will cause death and spiritual death. But the man who will, I don't want to say the Don Draper way of like stuffing your feelings way down deep inside, but the man who is able to endure hardship, right? Hardship and pain, will keep going. Leaving everything, weary with winter, I wandered out on the frozen waves, hoping to find a place, a people, a lord to replace my loved ones. No one knew me. Now, no one offered comfort, allowed me feasting or joy. This is almost like a psalm, isn't it? I'm not saying it is a psalm. I'm saying it is like a psalm in terms of it makes me think of David, right? And the times when he's wrapped in sackcloth, right? And no people know him. No one offers him comfort. How cruel a journey I've traveled, sharing my bread with sorrow alone, an exile in every land. Could only be told by telling my footsteps, for who can hear, friendless and poor? And know what I've known since the long cheerful nights, when young and yearning, with my Lord I yet feasted most welcome of all. That warmth is dead. He only knows who needs his Lord as I do, eager for long missing aid. He only knows who never sleeps, without the deepest dreams of longing. Sometimes it seems I see my Lord, kiss and embrace him, bend my hands and head to his knee, kneeling as though he still sat enthroned, ruling his thanes, and I open my eyes, embracing the air, and see the brown sea billows heave, see the seabirds bathe, spreading their white feathered wings, watch the frost and the hail and the snow, and heavy in heart I long for my Lord alone and unloved. Notice the alliteration there, the longing, unloved, the euphonous L sounds. I long for my Lord alone and unloved. Sometimes it seems I see my kin and greet them gladly, give them welcome, the best of friends. They fade away, swimming soundlessly out of sight, leaving nothing. How loathsome become the frozen waves to a weary heart. Now notice the contrast, right, between this and the Seafarer, where in the Seafarer, the waves are the method through which, by which he is able to conquer. It's a metaphor for riding this wave of life, and he's able to master not his fate destiny, but master his sense of purpose. Yes. Whereas in this one, this guy sees the waves and water as death and sinking into the abyss because of his circumstances in his life. Thank you, Natesky, for dropping that link. I appreciate you. In this brief world, I cannot wonder that my mind is set on melancholy, because I never forget the fate of men robbed of their riches, suddenly looted by death, the doom of earth, sent to us by every rising sun. Wisdom is slow and comes but late. He who has it is patient. He cannot be hasty to speak. He cannot be hasty to hate or speak. He must be bold and yet not blind, nor too craven, complacent, or covetous, nor ready to gloat before he wins glory. The man's a fool who flings his boasts hotly to the heavens, heeding his spleen and not the better boldness of knowledge. What knowing man knows not the ghostly waste-like end of worldly wealth? Yeah, that's so true, right? What knowing man knows not the ghostly waste-like end of worldly wealth? Faux show. Yes? Temporary, temporal pleasure and wealth are a trifle, right? They disappear. They are gone. See, already the wreckage is there. The windswept walls stand far and wide. The storm-beaten blocks besmeared with frost. The mead halls crumbled, the monarchs thrown down and stripped of their pleasures. The proudest of warriors now lie by the wall, some of them war destroyed, some the monstrous seabird bore over the ocean. To some the old wolf dealt out death, and for some dejected followers fashioned an earth cave coffin. Thus the maker of men lays waste this earth, crushing our callow mirth, and the work of old giants stands withered and still. So this was a meditation on, he is meditating on the fluctuating, the winds of change, right? I can't whistle. Somebody in the chat, whistle out a good old, CIA Scorpions winds of change for me, please. He who these ruins rightly sees and deeply considers this dark, twisted life, who sagely remembers the endless slaughters of a bloody past, is bound to proclaim, where is the war steed? Where is the warrior? Where is his warlord? Where now the feasting places? Where now the mead hall pleasures? Alas, bright cup! Alas, brave knight! Alas, you glorious princes, all gone! Lost in the night, as you never have lived. And all that survives you is a serpentine wall, wondrously high, worked in strange ways. Mighty spears have slain these men. Greedy weapons have framed their fate. These rocky slopes are beaten by storms. This earth pinned down by driving snow, by the horror of winter, smothering warmth in the shadows of night. And the north angrily hurls its hailstorms at our helpless heads. Everything earthly is evilly born, firmly clutched by a fickle fate. Fortune vanishes, friendship vanishes, man is fleet, woman is fleeting, and all this earth rolls into emptiness. So says the sage in his heart, sitting alone with his thought. It's good to guard your faith, nor let your grief come forth until it cannot call for help, nor help but heed the path you've placed before it. It's good to find your grace in God, the heavenly rock, where rests our every hope. Quite a narrative poem there, right? Yes. I mean, that one's pretty strong. And again, let me reiterate for the zillionth time here. Literature, poems are not meant to teach you. They're not a mystery. They're not a riddle to be solved. Okay? They are the views and insights into truth or the world or worldly matters or purpose, right? And art is supposed to reflect, right? Who are we and why are we here? Yes. And that is why it echoes through into the present. Yo, what up, Jerry? I just rewound at the beginning. So let me post this up here. I just rewound at the beginning. So I'm going to start watching this now. This is going to be good. I already know. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Everybody, if you're watching this later, if you're watching this out there in the psychosphere, please go and like and share Jerry's videos at Exposing Powerful Lies live streams because he has great content. He's hilarious, smart, funny, wise certainly beyond his years, wise beyond my years, insightful, patient. Okay, you get it. Yeah, he's our homeboy though. All right, so now I thought I would read, just take a little detour into the present, or at least into recent time, and read you some of Seamus Heaney's poems. And this is, he didn't win the Nobel Prize for this particular book from which I'm about to read, but he did win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995. You don't really win it for a specific work. You win it for a body of work. But nothing surpasses Seamus Heaney with this book, North. It's a Faber edition. And actually, look at that. I met this man. I studied in the Seamus Heaney Center for Poetry at Queens, where he went to school. And so he is named for him. The library there is named for him. And I met him a couple of times, but I specifically met him at a school called Methody across the street, where he did a reading. And that's where what's his face from Jamie Dornan, the actor, went to school, who is in the movie Belfast, which is nominated for Best Picture this year. And who was in that perverted MK Ultra Lucifer, John of Galt. Or John, what's his name? I'm mixing my metaphors here. What's the boomer wine lady book? The pervert book. And then the movie 50 Shades of Grey, right? Yeah, that's where he went to school. Anyway, I met Seamus Heaney there, and he signed this book. And I wrote part of my thesis on this book, North. And this is an amazing book. It was published this is the Faber edition. This was published in 1975 at the height of the Troubles. And this book is part Celtic, Viking, Anglo-Saxon history, but as lyric poems, and part contemporary Northern Irish troubles. And it informed, I got a lot out of this book in terms of what I wrote in my own book. So we're going to read this this poem called Punishment. And this is as pure of a Viking poem as I can think of. That was the chair. That was the chair making that noise. Here it goes. Okay. There's a little leather chair here, creaking and crawling. So we're going to read this this poem, Punishment, by Seamus Heaney. And it is about an event that actually occurred, which was where some people found an unearthed skeleton in a bog. It was either in Europe, like in Denmark, or I think it was like in Denmark. But they found a bog. What we're talking about when we talk about a bog, right? We're talking about basically a land area where in Northern Ireland, for instance, if you're an American, you might know this, but like they have turf or peat, right? Which is like you cut cubes into the earth and it's like a dirt and you make a cube and you dry it out and then it's flammable. You can burn it. It's got ketones and all this stuff in it. You burn it and it has this amazing aroma that when you go to Ireland or you go to Northern Ireland, you smell it one time and you will never forget it. It's so amazing. And it's like a home aroma to me. It's like home. That's how I can describe it. But they also have these bogs, right, where, animals get stuck in these bogs. Everybody knows what a bog is. But what they do is they serve to, if a person gets stuck in it, it's like they're mummified because of the lack of oxygen. And I mean, that's as far as the science as I know, or whatever, the science. But anyway, they did this. They pulled this woman out, and it turns out, this was it wasn't recent. They didn't find a recently murdered woman. They found a woman who was the victim of who was punished in, a couple thousand years before, maybe 1,000 years before, in a Viking either ritual or an execution. So it's called punishment. I can feel the tug of the halter at the nape of her neck, the wind on her naked front. It blows her nipples to amber beads. It shakes the frail rigging of her ribs. I can see her drowned body in the bog, the weighing stone, the floating rods and boughs, under which at first she was a barked sapling that is dug up oak bone, brain firkin. Her shaved head like a stubble of black corn, her blindfold a soiled bandage, her noose a ring to store the memories of love. Little adulteress, before they punished you, you were flaxen-haired, undernourished, and your tar-black face was beautiful. My poor scapegoat, I almost love you, but would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. I am the artful voyeur of your brain's exposed and darkened combs, your muscles webbing, and all your numbered bones. I who have stood dumb when your betraying sisters, called in tar, wept by the railings, who would connive in civilized outrage, yet understand the exact and tribal intimate revenge. It's a pretty powerful poem, right? Because he's saying that he's witnessing this, and it's almost like he can imagine himself witnessing it now, right? Think of that. Think of what the speaker's saying here, though, which I think is powerful, because he's saying he's being honest with himself, and he's saying if he were alive then, or it's now, and he's witnessing this woman who's been tarred and feathered because she is an adulteress and she's condemned by her society, then you can imagine what any number of things now, which are probably the opposite of that, right? Because those things seem to be condoned now. But in terms of the condemnation, he's saying he would witness this execution and he would say nothing, right? Now, not say nothing in terms of the fact that she is. This reminds me of the Crucible, which we may be talking about later. I'm not going to say any more than that, but the idea of condemnation at the behest of others, regardless of, maybe she was innocent, maybe she's accused, but he's saying that he would have stood and done nothing. Now, I think it's powerful because we see in the world now, obviously, that all sorts of things that we can't even talk about here happen, and people stand by and do nothing, right? They do nothing. And not everyone, obviously. There are good people, but we see it all the time where horrible things happen and no one does anything or bats an eye. And I think it's pretty amazing that in the poem, he doesn't try to say that, no, he would have done something else. He says he would have done nothing. But understanding the exact intimate revenge, right? Because obviously the Vikings, as we discussed, we didn't discuss it, but I mentioned this great book, this saga right here, Eagle Saga. And one of the things that happens in the book is in the Viking law, they have blood feuds, right? So actually what you take from it is that if somebody slights you or someone steals your horse or whatever, and you do nothing, then they keep it. And it is incumbent upon you to go and seek, to wreak revenge on that person. And that is allowed. In fact, it's expected. Yes. So it's this idea of this blood feud. Now we know that gets canceled out, right? Because they're sort of existing by this eye for an eye rule of law. Yes. And that later gets canceled out. But I think it's amazing. Crispy said, whatever you say, nothing. Whatever you say nothing. Yes. But I just think that's a pretty strong poem. Should I read one more? Seamus Heaney. Maybe I can read, let's see, The Bog Queen, because it's kind of about the same thing. No, let's read a different one because Heaney is so good because the reason Heaney translated Beowulf and that it was so potent and powerful is because he writes in the manner of an Anglo-Saxon poet in terms of what you call the kenning. He'll have instead of a descriptive phrase, right? The poet will synthesize the language down into usually like a 2-word phrase with a dash in the middle, right? So in other words, like the sword or the strong sword that the man carried will simply be dragon slayer, right? Or muscle slicer. So we get this sort of action verb language within a 2-word noun phrase. Yes. So maybe we could go into Beowulf, but I think maybe we'll save that for another stream because that will take a whole stream by itself. And so why don't we plan on doing that? We will come back and talk about Beowulf in terms of the epitome of this language, and we can even discuss the film. We will discuss the 2008. So many movies in 2008, right? This 2008 Zemeckis movie, which stars Ray Winstone. I don't know how, but my best friend in England is best friends with Ray Winstone's daughter, if that makes sense. I don't. Right, everybody's related to everybody else, but anyway, he plays Beowulf in the film, and so I guess we can come back to that. In the meantime, you guys, thank you for another night of based analyzation. I appreciate it. I appreciate you all for coming by, for stopping by, especially with JD rolling. I'm about to get off and probably go back into the Jay's Analysis stream. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for dropping the links. If you're watching this later, please, you guys, consider, supporting me with the PayPal at Bayes Lit Analyzer. I mean, with Cash App, Bayes Lit Analyzer, or PayPal. Just go into links in the chat or in the channel description. Click on those and just drop some fat coin. I really would appreciate it. It's March, and we're trying to get this channel rolling. Especially, I would appreciate if you would share this somewhere, or tell somebody about it word of mouth. Let's get our counts up, and let's keep going. We've only been going for 2 weeks now, so we're doing pretty well. But we're gonna keep barreling through. So I appreciate it, y'all, and I love you, and I hope you have a good night. So this has been fun. Thanks for going on this little journey with me. Appreciate you. Bye, y'all. Peace.